Well, President Trump promised a whole civilization will die if Iran doesn't make a deal to end the war he started. Just minutes ago, he pulled back on that threat for 2 weeks. President Donald Trump is pulling back now on his threat to wipe out Iran. Earlier today, he promised, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Now he says he won't do that if Iran agrees to a ceasefire and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 2 weeks. That deadline was less than an hour from now at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific time. And just minutes ago, in a post on his social media site, Trump said Iran could agree to, quote, complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, then he'd be willing to suspend the bombing and attack on Iran for a period of 2 weeks. Trump had said the U.S. will strike its power plants and other civilian infrastructure if Iran doesn't comply. Trump now says Iran has proposed a workable 10-point peace plan that could help end the war.
Hey friends, Adam is here. So this is what just happened, guys. This is no longer posturing. Trump has started a real war with Iran, bombs dropping, American service members dying. The Pentagon's confirmed numbers, at least 13 dead, over 370 wounded. 13 families got that knock on the door. And the military's own projections say it's accelerating, not stabilizing. More casualties are coming.
Now to the war with Iran. Two officials confirmed to CBS News that the Pentagon will send more ships, up to 5,000 sailors and Marines, to the Mideast. The news comes with at least 13 American service members who have been confirmed dead as part of Operation Epic Fury. Erica Brown is live at the White House with the latest developments. Erica, good evening.
Good evening, Dick. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called those service members who were recently killed in a military plane crash American heroes. And the comments come as the military plans to ramp up attacks against Iran, with U.S. Marines expected to be deployed in the region, according to officials. And Defense Secretary Hegseth said that today had the highest volume yet of strikes on Iran.
Trump's response to 13 dead Americans? He went on the world stage and threatened to wipe Iran, a country of 90 million people, completely off the map in a single night if they don't reopen the Strait of Hormuz by midnight. Those aren't my words. That's the commander-in-chief.
We have just heard from Donald Trump post on social media. He's again reiterating his threats. A whole civilization will die tonight, he says, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. And he goes on to say, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary, wonderful can happen. Who knows? We'll find out tonight.
Think about the psychology of that for a moment. An American president facing a genuine international crisis that he created, with dead soldiers piling up and wounded troops filling hospitals, and his response is to make threats so extreme they sound like something from a movie villain. Take out an entire nation in one night. That's not diplomatic language. That's not strategic communication. That's not how serious leaders handle geopolitical crises. That's how someone talks when they're panicking, when they're cornered, when they've realized they've lost control of the situation they created, and they're trying to mask their desperation with ever more extreme rhetoric. This is not normal presidential behavior. This is not how a functioning government operates. This is not how a stable leader acts under pressure when the stakes are literally life and death for American service members. And here's the thing that makes this whole situation even more damning when you step back and look at how we got here. This war didn't just happen to Trump. He wasn't an innocent bystander watching events unfold beyond his control. He actively created the conditions for this conflict. He spent months escalating tensions deliberately. He kept issuing these impossible ultimatums that he thought would make him look strong and decisive. He kept drawing lines in the sand and saying things like, "Cross this line and we'll destroy you. We'll take you out in one night. You'll face consequences like you've never seen." Well, someone called his bluff, or someone crossed his line, or someone decided they weren't going to be intimidated by threats from an American president who's made a career out of talking tough. And now people are dead. Now American families are receiving phone calls from the Pentagon telling them their son or daughter or husband or wife isn't coming home. And the president who started all of this, who created this entire disaster, is doubling down instead of finding a way out. He's threatening even bigger strikes. He's talking about taking Iran out in one night. He's escalating when any rational leader would be desperately searching for an off-ramp. The rescue operations currently underway tell you everything you need to know about how badly this has gone wrong on the ground. American pilots have been shot down over Iranian territory. These aren't old, obsolete aircraft. We're talking about an F-15E fighter jet, one of the most advanced pieces of military technology in the American arsenal, and Iran shot it down. That tells you Iran isn't some paper tiger that's going to fold the moment America flexes its muscles. Iran has real military capabilities. Iran can fight back. Iran can hurt us. And now American pilots are on the ground in enemy territory right now. They ejected from that aircraft and they're somewhere inside Iran, under fire, in immediate danger, waiting to be rescued while the military scrambles to extract them. This isn't some clean surgical operation you read about in military textbooks. This is chaos. This is crisis management at its most desperate. This is the kind of situation that happens when a president escalates far beyond what he can actually manage and control, when tough talk collides with military reality, when the consequences of reckless decisions finally come due. And it happened for one reason and one reason only. Donald Trump wanted to look tough. He wanted to prove he could handle Iran. He wanted to make a statement. He wanted to project strength and dominance. That's it. That's the profound, pathetic reason American soldiers are dead tonight. Because one man's ego demanded satisfaction. Because one man's insecurity required a display of power. And now 13 families are planning funerals, and hundreds more are sitting by hospital beds, and American pilots are trapped behind enemy lines praying for rescue. That's the cost of presidential vanity. That's the price of letting someone with no impulse control and no strategic vision sit in the most powerful office on earth. And here's where it gets even more significant for Trump's political survival. His own people are abandoning him. They're jumping ship publicly. Joe Kent, who served as the top counterterrorism official for the entire Trump administration, think about that position, the person responsible for protecting America from terrorist threats. He resigned. He didn't quietly step away. He didn't issue some bland statement about spending more time with family. He came out publicly and said this entire war was unnecessary. He blamed Israeli pressure for pushing Trump into escalating the conflict beyond any rational point. He basically stood up in front of the world and said, "I can't be part of this anymore. This is wrong. This war shouldn't have happened. This is a catastrophic mistake." When your own top counterterrorism official resigns and publicly denounces the war you started as unnecessary, that's not just bad optics. That's a 5-alarm fire signaling that something is fundamentally broken inside the decision-making apparatus of the United States government. That's not some low-level bureaucrat with an axe to grind. That's the person charged with keeping America safe from terrorism, saying the president has created a disaster that serves no American interest. That's devastating. That's the kind of defection that moves the needle in Congress. That's the kind of public break that makes other officials start asking themselves whether they can continue serving under this president. That's the kind of moment that historically precedes a presidency's collapse. And the political pressure is building with every passing hour. People are starting to call for Trump to step down, and I'm not talking about the usual voices, the people who opposed Trump from day one. I'm talking about serious people inside Congress, serious figures inside the government. Establishment voices who don't throw around words like resignation and impeachment lightly. They're starting to say openly and publicly that Trump may need to resign because he's gotten in over his head in a way that's putting American lives at risk. Resignation talk isn't some fringe fantasy anymore. Impeachment discussions aren't happening in the shadows. These are legitimate conversations taking place in serious rooms among serious people who understand the weight of what they're discussing. Because 13 Americans are dead and the president is playing nuclear chicken with an entire nation, while American pilots are trapped on the ground and hundreds of wounded soldiers are lying in hospital beds wondering why they're suffering. The midterm elections are coming and this war is going to dominate everything about the political landscape. Democrats are going to seize on this as their primary weapon against Trump and against every Republican who stands with him. They're going to hammer this message relentlessly. They're going to say Trump started a war he couldn't manage. They're going to say American soldiers died because of his recklessness and his ego. They're going to point out that Trump's response to dead American troops is to threaten even more destruction, to put even more American lives at risk, to escalate a crisis instead of finding a way to end it. That's an incredibly powerful political message. That's the kind of argument that makes voters who might have supported Trump on the economy or immigration suddenly reconsider everything. That's the kind of thing that swings elections in dramatic fashion. That's the kind of narrative that can turn a president who ran as a tough guy on national security into someone who looks reckless and dangerous and fundamentally unconcerned with American lives. And the global economy is starting to absorb the shockwaves right now. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed because of this conflict. If you don't understand what that means, let me make it crystal clear. The Strait of Hormuz is not some minor waterway that only shipping companies care about. It's one of the most critical choke points in the entire global economy. 20% of the world's oil flows through that narrow passage. 1/5 of all the oil that powers the global economy passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. When you close that strait, when you choke off that flow of oil, you're not just inconveniencing a few tankers. You're sending a shock through the entire world economy. Oil prices are spiking dramatically. Gas prices at the pump are shooting up. People are paying significantly more just to fill up their cars and get to work. Businesses are paying more for fuel and transportation. Supply chains that depend on affordable energy are getting disrupted. The whole economic system is absorbing the impact of Trump's war with Iran. And for what purpose? What vital American interest is being served by this chaos? So Trump could prove he was tough? So he could show he wasn't afraid to use military force? 13 Americans are dead, and the global economy is hemorrhaging because one man's ego required a demonstration of power. Let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand the full arc of how we arrived at this disaster. Trump returned to office in January of 2025 with an enormous amount of aggressive rhetoric about Iran already loaded and ready to go. From his very first days back in power, he was talking tough, making ultimatums, threatening military action, projecting this image of a strongman who wouldn't be pushed around by anyone. And fairly quickly, that rhetoric started transforming into actual policy. He wasn't just giving speeches about Iran. He was directing his administration to prepare for confrontation. He was surrounding himself with people who had their own reasons for wanting to see Iran taken down, particularly figures connected to the Israeli government who had long advocated for aggressive American action against Iran. These people had their own agenda, their own strategic objectives, and they found in Trump a willing vessel for their ambitions. They pushed for escalation. They encouraged his worst impulses. And Trump, eager to please those voices and eager to look strong, gave them exactly what they wanted. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of this entire crisis because it's arguably one of the most strategically significant pieces of water anywhere on the planet. This isn't exaggeration or hyperbole. It's basic geopolitical reality that anyone in national security understands. The strait is a narrow passage of water situated between Iran and Oman, and it serves as the sole maritime exit point for the vast majority of oil produced in the Persian Gulf region. There's simply no alternative route. It's a natural choke point of immense strategic importance. Approximately 20% of all the oil consumed globally passes through this single narrow strait every day. Every single day, 1/5 of the world's oil supply transits through waters that Iran can potentially threaten or close. If someone shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, the global economy feels it instantly. Prices spike across every sector. Businesses suffer massive cost increases. Consumers pay more at every level. This isn't some theoretical concern that only matters to economists. It's an immediate, tangible economic crisis that ripples through every corner of the interconnected global economy. Trump apparently decided that threatening Iran over the Strait of Hormuz was his path to looking powerful and projecting American strength to the world. He started making public ultimatums. He repeatedly declared that Iran must keep the strait open or face devastating consequences. He was trying to rattle cages, trying to intimidate Tehran into submission, trying to prove he was a different kind of leader who wouldn't bow to pressure from regional powers. But that's not how Iran perceived his threats. Iran didn't see a strong leader making reasonable demands. Iran saw an existential threat to their sovereignty and their strategic position. They saw an American president who was backing them into a corner and leaving them no face-saving way out. And so they responded. They didn't back down, they pushed back, and then everything started escalating with terrifying speed. Attacks happened, military operations commenced, lines of communication that might have prevented disaster broke down completely. Miscalculations multiplied in the fog of rising tension. And before anyone really understood what was happening or how to stop the momentum, we were in a full-scale shooting war, not a Cold War. Not diplomatic posturing, not saber-rattling from a safe distance. An actual, real military conflict with weapon systems being deployed and people being killed and blood being spilled. American soldiers were dying. Real human beings with families and futures were being lost. And it all happened so fast, with such terrifying momentum, because Trump wanted to look tough and sound strong, and nobody in his orbit had the ability or the willingness or the political capital to pump the brakes and force a de-escalation. The specific incident that truly ignited this into full-scale warfare was the shoot-down of an F-15E fighter jet. This aircraft represents some of the most sophisticated military technology the United States possesses. These aren't outdated planes that have been sitting in storage for decades. They're modern, advanced, state-of-the-art combat aircraft that cost tens of millions of dollars each and represent years of technological development. The fact that Iran successfully shot one down sends an unmistakable message. Iran's military is not some pushover force that will collapse at the first sign of American power. Iran has genuine capabilities. Iran can fight back effectively. Iran can inflict real damage on American military assets and American personnel. And when they shot down that jet, the pilots had to eject. They're on the ground inside Iran right now in hostile territory, under fire, trying to survive until rescue forces can reach them. The military is conducting desperate extraction operations to bring those pilots home, and every minute that passes increases the danger they face. This isn't some clean, controlled military operation. This is a desperate rescue mission behind enemy lines. This is American service members in immediate mortal danger because their president started a war without thinking through the consequences. And it's not just one isolated incident. The shoot-down of the F-15 wasn't the extent of Iranian capabilities or Iranian responses. There have been multiple attacks since this conflict erupted. American military bases throughout the region have come under fire. Casualties have been piling up steadily. The Pentagon's official count now stands at 13 dead and 370 wounded. And every military analyst watching this situation says those numbers are going to rise. More casualties are expected imminently because this war hasn't stopped. It hasn't been resolved. The fighting is continuing. The engagements are ongoing. Trump's threat about destroying Iran hasn't been carried out, and in the meantime, American service members remain in harm's way. More could die tomorrow. More could be wounded in the next engagement. There's no clear exit strategy visible anywhere. There's no articulated plan for how this conflict ends short of Trump's blustery threats to annihilate an entire country, which sounds dramatically easier in a campaign speech than it is to actually execute in military reality. Trump's rhetoric has become increasingly unhinged as the situation on the ground has deteriorated. Rather than showing the judgment to pull back and find some diplomatic off-ramp, he's been threatening even worse outcomes. He said Iran could be taken out in one night, completely wiped away, totally destroyed in a single evening of overwhelming American military force. One night to destroy an entire nation. That's the language of desperation. That's not the careful communication of a leader managing an international crisis. That's not the measured tone of someone trying to find a negotiated solution. That's the kind of language that comes out when someone is panicking, when they're cornered, when they realize things have spiraled far beyond their ability to control, and they're trying to mask their terror with ever more extreme declarations. It's bravado disguising desperation. It's weakness pretending to be strength. And everyone watching, both allies and adversaries, can see right through it. The national security establishment is already fracturing in response to this disaster. Joe Kent, the top counterterrorism official for the entire Trump administration, resigned publicly and made his reasons devastatingly clear. This isn't some anonymous mid-level staffer or career bureaucrat whose name nobody recognizes. This was a senior official at the apex of the counterterrorism apparatus. Someone with access to the most sensitive classified information, someone whose judgment carries serious weight inside the government and on Capitol Hill. And his reason for walking away was explosive. He said the war was entirely unnecessary. He said it was pushed by Israeli pressure and Israeli strategic interests rather than American national security needs. He said Trump escalated when any responsible leader would have shown restraint. He said Trump should have found another path. That's a damning indictment coming from inside the president's own administration. That's someone at the highest levels saying, I can no longer be associated with what this president is doing because it's fundamentally wrong. When your own counterterrorism chief resigns and publicly declares that the war you started serves foreign interests rather than American ones, you have lost the confidence of your own team. The consensus inside your own government has shifted decisively against you. That's the kind of development that historically triggers cascading consequences. The American public is beginning to turn against this war as well. Support is eroding with every new casualty report. People are seeing the numbers. 13 dead, 370 wounded, more expected. And they're asking the most basic and devastating question: why? Why are we fighting this war? What vital American interest is being protected? What's the objective? What does victory even look like? How many American service members have to die before this ends? Those are reasonable questions that citizens ask when they don't understand why their country is at war. And the fact that those questions are spreading tells you the public hasn't been convinced this conflict is necessary or justified. That matters tremendously for the political calculations happening in Washington right now. That matters for Trump's ability to maintain support. That matters for the midterms. That matters for whether Republicans in Congress decide to stick with him or start creating distance. The energy crisis triggered by this conflict is starting to inflict real economic pain on American families. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz is driving oil prices up dramatically, and those increases show up immediately at gas pumps across the country. People are paying significantly more just to fill up their vehicles and get to work. That's not an abstract economic indicator. That's money coming out of family budgets. That's people making harder choices about other spending because fuel costs are consuming more of their income. Businesses are absorbing higher transportation and production costs and passing them along to consumers. Inflationary pressures are building throughout the economy. People feel this directly in their daily lives. And when people feel economic pain, they look for someone to blame. The president always gets the blame for economic suffering. That's just political reality. And in this case, the blame is directly traceable to a war that Trump chose to start. NATO allies are growing increasingly frustrated with Trump's handling of this crisis. He's been threatening to withdraw from the alliance if member countries don't actively participate in his Iran war. But many NATO nations want absolutely nothing to do with this conflict. They see it as an American problem of Trump's own creation, not a collective defense obligation. They're not eager to send their own troops into harm's way for a war they had no role in starting. And Trump's response to their hesitation is to threaten the entire alliance structure that has kept the peace in Europe for generations. That's how you destroy alliances. That's how you push your closest friends into the arms of your adversaries. That's how you leave America isolated on the world stage, fighting a war alone that you started for no good reason. The situation with American pilots stranded on the ground inside Iran represents a tinderbox that could ignite even larger catastrophe. There's an ongoing rescue operation happening in real time. There are American service members in immediate, life-threatening danger behind enemy lines. This is the kind of volatile, unpredictable situation that can spiral into something vastly bigger in a matter of moments. If the rescue mission goes wrong, if American forces get killed trying to extract those pilots, if the operation turns into a larger engagement with Iranian forces, the public reaction will be volcanic. The political pressure on Trump will intensify beyond anything we've seen. The calls for resignation will become deafening. The midterm implications for Republicans will become catastrophic. Every minute those pilots remain on the ground represents a potential trigger for a much larger explosion. So where does this trajectory lead? Trump almost certainly doesn't resign voluntarily. That's simply not in his psychological makeup. He's not someone who admits defeat or steps down gracefully when the pressure mounts. His instinct is always to double down, to lash out, to escalate rather than retreat. But Congress may start moving on impeachment regardless of what Trump wants. Democrats will absolutely push for impeachment proceedings if more American soldiers die in this conflict. And some Republicans, watching their political futures flash before their eyes, might start abandoning him if the cost of loyalty becomes too high. If more casualties mount, if the economy continues to deteriorate, if public opinion turns decisively against the war, that's when you start seeing cracks in the Republican wall. That's when serious figures in the GOP start calculating that their own survival requires distance from the president who started this disaster. The midterm elections are now fundamentally shaped by this war and its casualties. Democrats are going to run on this constantly and relentlessly. They're going to hammer the message that Trump started a reckless, unnecessary war with Iran. They're going to remind voters that 13 Americans died because of his decisions and hundreds more were wounded. They're going to connect the economic pain at the gas pump directly to Trump's failed foreign policy. They're going to argue that Trump has no plan, no exit strategy, no vision for how this ends except more threats and more escalation and more American casualties. That's an extraordinarily powerful electoral message. That's the kind of argument that swings independent voters and energizes the Democratic base and makes Republicans in swing districts very, very nervous about their political futures, especially if this war is still ongoing when voters go to the polls, especially if more Americans have died by then, especially if gas prices remain elevated and the economic pain continues to spread. Globally, this situation is devastating for American credibility and strategic positioning. Our allies are watching a president stumble into a war he can't control and wondering whether American leadership is reliable anymore. They're seeing him threaten to abandon alliances that have been the cornerstone of global stability for decades. They're watching him back himself into a corner where he either has to follow through on apocalyptic threats or admit publicly that he was bluffing. Either outcome damages American power and influence. Either path diminishes America's standing in the world. This has long-term consequences for American foreign policy that will outlast any single presidency, because once credibility is lost, it's extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. This is the reality. Trump started a war with Iran. 13 Americans are dead, 370 wounded. His own officials are resigning and publicly denouncing him. Congress is discussing removal. The public is turning. And his response to all of it is more threats, more escalation, more chaos. This is the kind of crisis that historically ends presidencies. The midterms will serve as a national referendum on the blood and treasure spent on a war that never needed to happen. It's going to get worse before it gets better.